My parents secretly rewrote my grandmother's will to favor my brother. Now they're suing me for emotional damages. When the lawyer handed me a box labeled miscellaneous, I didn't think twice about it. I barely registered it, honestly. I was too busy sitting there, numb, trying to process how everything my grandmother had promised me was now legally my brother's. He didn't even show up for the funeral, but somehow he ended up with her house, her savings, her keepsakes. And me? I got this damn cardboard box. But that's not where the story begins. It starts way before that, before the betrayal, before the lies, before my name was quietly erased from a woman's legacy who once swore she'd never let anyone else forget me. Let me take you back. If you were to ask anyone in my family what kind of daughter I was growing up, they'd probably throw around words like rebellious, difficult, or dramatic. But truthfully, I was just quiet. I kept to myself. I did okay in school, wasn't particularly gifted or troubled. I didn't win awards or get crowned homecoming queen like some girls did. And I certainly didn't beam in photos the way my parents wanted for their perfect holiday cards. I was just there, an afterthought in the family portrait, someone to crop out when space got tight. My brother, on the other hand, was the golden child in every cliched, frustrating way. Chase could do no wrong, even when he did. Got caught stealing in middle school? Boys will be boys. Failed 2 classes? The teachers must have been bad. Meanwhile, if I so much as rolled my eyes, I was grounded for a week for having an attitude. It was a running joke in high school that Chase had parents and I had a roommate situation with legal guardians. But it didn't start to hurt until it became routine. Until birthdays passed where he got brand new bikes and gaming systems, while I got books I already owned. Until I overheard my dad once telling a family friend that Chase was the one with real potential. I remember blinking back tears in the hallway, realizing he meant it. But through it all, every slammed door, every family dinner where I felt like furniture, there was one person who saw me. Grandma June. I called her that even when I was little, because Grandma felt too plain for a woman like her. June was this wiry, sharp-witted force of nature. She had laugh lines like creases in an old map, and she always smelled like cinnamon gum and garden soil. She didn't talk to me like I was a kid, she listened like I was someone worth hearing. June lived alone in a modest, cozy 2-bedroom house with ivy climbing up the back porch and an old Labrador named Mocha who waddled like a retired war hero. That house was a sanctuary. She'd let me stay over on weekends when things got rough at home, and she always had a hidden stash of marshmallows even when she said she was watching her sugar. When I was 12, she showed me her will. "This house will be yours one day," she told me. "The money too, what little there is. I know they don't see you, but I do. And I want you to have a fresh start when I'm gone." I didn't know what to say back then. That was the first time I truly believed someone loved me unconditionally. Fast forward to last year. I'm 31 now, working in marketing, single, surviving. I hadn't talked to Chase in over 5 years, and honestly, I was fine with that. June had gotten sick, early signs of memory loss, and I was the one who took her to appointments, sat with her during lab results, and made sure her prescriptions were filled. My parents? They popped in every few weeks, dropped off takeout, took selfies for social media, then left. By the end, June didn't always recognize me, but even then, she'd smile when I walked in the room. The day she died, something hollow opened up in me. Like my ribs were just scaffolding now, no heart left inside. She was the only one who really saw me. And then came the reading of the will. I showed up in a simple black dress, hair tied back, hands trembling but steady enough to sign the visitor's book. I was expecting grief. I was expecting some logistical stuff, maybe a form or 2 to claim the house. What I got was silence. Tight-lipped stares from my parents. A smirk from Chase, who I hadn't even realized was coming. And then the lawyer read the will, leaving everything to my brother. Everything. The house. The money. The antique jewelry box June kept hidden under her bed. All of it. I asked the lawyer if there'd been a mistake. He said no, this was the only valid will on file. I looked at my parents, wide-eyed, and my mother just shook her head slowly. "It's what she wanted," she said flatly, as if I should know that already. "Move on, sweetheart," my father added. "It's done." Something in me broke that day. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there, blinking, as my brother signed some papers with a brand new Mont Blanc pen and gave me a smug little shrug like he'd won some secret competition. And the worst part? A tiny part of me believed them. Believed that maybe June had changed her mind. Maybe I wasn't enough. Maybe I'd imagined it all. But that box, the one labeled miscellaneous, the one I almost left behind, that box would change everything. I just didn't know it yet. The ride home from the lawyer's office was silent. I drove in a daze, barely hearing the hum of the engine or the clicking of the turn signal. Every so often, a wave of disbelief would wash over me again, like I was forgetting and then suddenly remembering that everything I'd been promised was gone. When I finally pulled into the driveway of my small rental, the numbness started to give way to something else. Something darker. Anger. Betrayal. The kind of ache that doesn't let you cry because it doesn't believe it would help. I sat in the driver's seat for a while, just staring at the cracked sidewalk, remembering all the conversations I'd had with June over cups of tea and slices of pound cake. The little comments she'd make about, "When this house is yours," or how she hoped I'd use her savings to finally take that trip to Ireland. Those weren't fantasies. They weren't just the ramblings of an old woman. And yet here I was, empty-handed. It didn't take long for the official paperwork to follow. Within 2 weeks, I got the formal notice. Chase was now the legal owner of June's home, and he had full rights to everything inside it. I didn't even get a token keepsake. Nothing sentimental. Not a single thing to hold on to. It was like I never existed in her life at all. The cherry on top? My parents didn't even bother to check in. No phone call, no text, not even a stiff holiday card. When I eventually called my mother, more out of a desperate need for clarity than hope, she answered like she was doing me a favor. She said there was no mistake, that June had simply changed her mind before she passed, and I needed to accept it and move on. My father chimed in, sounding almost irritated, saying it wasn't my place to question the wishes of a dying woman. The way they spoke, cold and absolute, made my skin crawl. It felt rehearsed, mechanical, like they'd said it before to each other, maybe even to Chase. I wanted to scream at them, to tell them they were wrong, that June wouldn't have done this, that something didn't feel right. But I didn't. I swallowed my anger, thanked them for the call, and hung up. I spent the rest of that night on the floor of my living room, the carpet imprinting its pattern into my skin while I just stared at the ceiling. My phone buzzed a few times, friends checking in, a couple of coworkers with innocuous messages, but I didn't respond. I couldn't. There was no way to explain what had been taken from me, not just materially, but emotionally. Because this wasn't just about a house or money. It was about the one person who loved me unconditionally, being stripped away from me in the most cruel, calculated way imaginable. Over the next few weeks, I tried to get back to normal. Work, groceries, scrolling through my phone pretending I cared about other people's lives. But that hollow feeling never really went away. It clung to me like damp clothes after a storm. I kept going back to one moment. About a month before June passed, when she'd had a rare, clear-headed day. We were sitting in her backyard, sunlight catching in her silver hair, and she told me again, like she had many times before, that she was proud of me, that I was strong, that she knew I'd make something beautiful out of life, even if no one else could see it yet. She said it like a goodbye. And now, thinking back on it, I wondered if she had known what was coming, if she had sensed the vultures circling, even then. The urge to dig deeper came slowly, then all at once. I started reviewing old emails and letters from June, trying to find anything that could explain the change in her will. But there was nothing. No hints, no warnings. Everything she'd ever written to me pointed to one thing. I was supposed to be the one. That's when I remembered the storage unit. June had rented one for years, mostly to keep seasonal decorations, old furniture, and her extensive collection of vintage magazines. She always joked that she was one tragic backstory away from being featured on a hoarder reality show. When she got sick, she mentioned it in passing, asking me to clear it out eventually, but I'd forgotten all about it in the chaos of her decline and the aftermath. I found the key taped to the back of one of her cookbooks. It was marked Unit 118B, and the address was only 20 minutes away. I didn't hesitate. The storage facility was the kind of place you drive past 100 times without noticing. Beige buildings with metal roll-up doors and faded numbers. The air inside was stale and dry, the kind that makes your throat itch. When I opened the unit, the smell hit me: old wood, musty paper, a faint whiff of cinnamon that reminded me of her. It was mostly junk. Boxes of kitchenware, old curtains, stacks of magazines bundled in twine. But toward the back, behind a stack of folded lawn chairs, I found a small plastic bin. Inside were random documents, old tax forms, expired insurance papers, some yellowed photographs, and then, at the bottom, a large envelope sealed with tape. It was labeled in June's careful, looping handwriting, to my granddaughter. My hands were shaking as I opened it. Inside was a letter, and behind the letter, a legal document, stamped and signed. It was her original will, dated a year earlier than the one presented by the lawyer. And it named me the sole beneficiary. Her house, her savings, everything. The letter was short, just a few paragraphs, but it was unmistakably her. She wrote that she knew how my parents felt about me and how they'd always treated Chase as the favorite. She said she feared that, once she was gone, they would try to erase me entirely. And so she wanted to make it clear, without question, that she was leaving everything to me, not because I needed it, but because I deserved it. She ended with a line I've never forgotten. This is not a gift. It is a recognition of who you are and what you've endured. I see you. I always have. I sat there, hunched in the corner of that dusty storage unit, with the letter in my lap and the will pressed to my chest, sobbing like a child. Not just from grief, or even relief, but from validation. Someone had tried to erase me, but she had written me back into existence. Now I had proof. I didn't leave that storage unit for hours. I read it at least 15 times. Every word, every signature, every notary stamp. I knew what it meant. It wasn't just sentimental, it was legal. It was real, and it changed everything. But even as my heart began to pound with something resembling hope, I also felt fear. Because if this will was real, and it was, then someone had gone out of their way to make sure it got buried. Someone had made sure that the version presented to the lawyer didn't match this one. And that someone had to be my family. It didn't take a genius to figure out how it happened. June had been in and out of hospitals for months near the end. There were days when she couldn't remember where she was, let alone the difference between a nurse and a family member. The decline had been slow, but cruel. There had been stretches of clarity, but they were becoming fewer and farther between. My parents knew this. Chase knew it too. It suddenly became clear to me why they had started visiting her more often near the end, why they'd gone from occasional drop-ins to frequent, almost performative family visits. They were grooming the situation, positioning themselves to look like caring relatives while probably manipulating her behind closed doors. And somehow, they'd gotten her to sign a new will. Or maybe it wasn't even her signature. That thought hit me like a gut punch. I stared at both documents side by side, the one I'd found in the envelope and the copy I'd requested from the lawyer. At first glance, they were similar. Same format, same font, same general structure. But the signatures, they weren't identical. The second one, the one that left everything to Chase, looked shakier, slanted, almost like a rushed imitation of June's usually steady hand. The notary name was different too. Not a legal firm or someone with credibility, just a name I didn't recognize. No company letterhead, no official stamp, just a signature scrawled next to a date. My chest tightened. I wasn't just imagining things. There was a real chance that someone had committed fraud. That night, I didn't sleep. I barely moved from my dining table where I'd laid out both documents under the harsh glow of the overhead light. I made copies. I took photos. I started jotting down notes in a notebook I hadn't touched in years, details, inconsistencies, everything I could recall about those last few months. I remembered the day Chase showed up at the hospital unannounced and offered to take over for a few days so I could rest. I'd been hesitant, but I let him. It was the only break I'd taken in weeks. He must have used that time. Or maybe my parents had handled it directly. I had no idea yet, but the more I thought about it, the more suspicious everything seemed. It wasn't just the will. I remembered how quickly they'd gotten in touch with the lawyer after June died, how they'd insisted on handling the arrangements, how I'd been excluded from almost every planning decision. At the time, I thought they were just being their usual, dismissive selves. Now, I saw it differently. They were orchestrating something. The next step was clear. I needed help. Real help. Not a friend with a law degree or a Reddit advice thread. I needed a lawyer. Someone who understood estate law and had experience with contesting wills. That Monday, I took a personal day from work and started making calls. Most places were booked weeks out. A few didn't return my messages at all. But finally, I found someone, an older woman named Marlene who sounded skeptical at first, but intrigued when I explained I had a signed copy of a previous will. She agreed to meet me that Friday. I spent the next few days organizing everything. Every card June had written me. Every text message between her and me that I could still access. Emails. Photos. I even pulled up the voice memo app on my phone and cried when I found a saved recording of June telling me how proud she was from a hospital visit about 6 months before her death. It wasn't evidence of a will, but it was character proof. It showed her state of mind and her feelings for me. When Friday came, I was equal parts hopeful and terrified. I sat across from Marlene in her small, cluttered office and handed over the envelope like it was radioactive. She didn't say much at first, just read quietly, her pen occasionally tapping against the edge of her notebook. After what felt like an eternity, she looked up and said something I'll never forget. that this wasn't just suspicious, it was legally questionable. She explained that the second will, the one on file, lacked the proper notary verification and had been signed during a period where June may not have had the mental capacity to consent. That the fact the witnesses listed were family friends of my parents, not legal representatives or medical professionals, raised serious red flags. She asked if I was ready for a fight. I told her I'd been fighting my whole life. I just didn't realize until now what it felt like to actually have ammunition. We began building the case that week. Step by step. It wasn't quick, and it wasn't easy. There were forms to file, affidavits to collect, official estate reviews to request. Marlene warned me early on. This wasn't going to be some quick fix. Contesting a will is hard, and it's even harder when the people you're up against are your own family. But I didn't care. The fear I'd felt earlier was still there, but it had changed shape. It wasn't paralyzing anymore. It was sharp, focused. It burned, but in a way that kept me moving forward. Of course, it didn't take long for my parents to find out. The day they received notice of the pending motion to challenge the estate, my phone lit up like a Christmas tree. Missed calls, voicemails. One from my mother, her voice high and clipped, demanding to know what I thought I was doing. Another from my father, accusing me of being ungrateful and trying to sabotage the family during a time of grief. But the one that really cut deep? Chase. Just one sentence in a cold text message. You're dead to this family. They thought I would back down, that I'd be too scared, too polite, too overwhelmed. But they underestimated one very important thing. I had nothing left to lose, and they had everything to hide. The legal wheels began turning faster than I expected. Marlene wasted no time filing the initial petition to contest the will, citing fraud, undue influence, and lack of testamentary capacity. We submitted the earlier, properly notarized version of the will alongside an affidavit from June's former primary care physician confirming that, in the final months of her life, her cognitive function had deteriorated significantly. The date on the contested will coincided with a documented period of hospitalization during which she'd been prescribed medication known to cause confusion and disorientation. The kicker? The witnesses on the contested will weren't neutral parties. They were close friends of my parents. One of them had even vacationed with my family multiple times. Marlene had them researched, and both had zero legal affiliations. One had a real estate license. The other was a yoga instructor. It wasn't just questionable, it was borderline laughable in a court of law. By the second court notice, my parents and Chase had officially lawyered up. Their attorney sent a formal response denying all allegations and insisting the will was valid. No acknowledgement of the earlier will. No mention of June's condition. They were sticking to their story, and Chase wasn't hiding his arrogance. He posted online, vague enough not to be actionable, but pointed, mocking jealous people who come crawling after they're left out. I didn't reply. The paperwork would speak for itself. Then came the countersuit. A formal claim for emotional distress, filed by my parents, claiming that my legal action was slanderous, humiliating, and had caused them extreme mental anguish. They accused me of trying to ruin the family's reputation, of exploiting June's death for financial gain, and of causing irreparable damage to their emotional well-being. Their argument leaned on the most absurd theatrics, how they were devoted caretakers during June's final months, how they'd sacrificed so much for me growing up only to be maliciously attacked by their own daughter. It was nauseating. Still, it worked on one level. The hostility exploded. I started getting calls from extended family I hadn't heard from in years. Some lectured me, others guilt-tripped. A few were more passive-aggressive, asking why I was dragging things out and couldn't just let Chase have this. Word had clearly gotten around, and my parents had spun their narrative well. But what they didn't anticipate was that I'd come prepared. I wasn't some emotional wreck tossing accusations around. I had documentation, photos, messages, letters, even recordings. I gathered them all. There was the birthday card June sent me 3 months before the second will was signed, where she wrote that I'd always be her everything and not to let anyone take away what was meant for me. There was a voicemail she left me weeks after Chase's caretaking started, complaining that she hadn't seen me in days and that they keep saying I'm too tired for visitors, though she didn't feel that tired at all. And most damning of all, a string of text messages between Chase and one of the so-called witnesses, joking about how his inheritance problem was almost solved and how his parents owed him big time after that stunt. Marlene put it all together like a war general. We submitted an updated motion that not only contested the second will, but now accused the parties involved of intentional fraud and manipulation of an incapacitated elder. The court responded by issuing a formal inquiry. Depositions were scheduled. Statements were subpoenaed. And suddenly, the smug confidence from their side began to unravel. The first deposition was a disaster for them. One of the witnesses admitted under oath that she hadn't actually watched June sign the document. She trusted my mom and Chase when they said it had already been signed. The judge ordered a forensic handwriting analyst to compare both documents, and preliminary findings showed enough inconsistencies to question the authenticity of the second will entirely. That's when the tone shifted. I received an email from their lawyer requesting mediation. They wanted to resolve the matter amicably. My parents were now concerned about the toll this was taking on the family and wanted to find a compromise. There would be no compromise. Not after they tried to erase me. Not after they stole from me. Not after they used June's deteriorating state as a loophole to fatten Chase's pockets. I rejected the mediation request outright. We'd gone this far. We were seeing it through. And that's when the social gloves came off. My mother showed up to my job. Just appeared, waiting in the lobby like she'd been invited. She asked to speak to me. She said this was tearing the family apart and that I should be ashamed of myself. I didn't say a word. I just walked back to my office and locked the door. Then Chase called. Not to apologize. Not to negotiate. But to threaten. He told me I was going to regret this. That I was going to lose, humiliate myself, and end up more alone than ever. But the more they pushed, the clearer everything became. This wasn't just about a will anymore. This was about power, control, about them being unable to accept that for once, I had leverage. That for once, I was standing up, not just for myself, but for the only person who had ever really loved me. We went to trial 2 months later. It took weeks of testimony, character witnesses, expert evaluations, hours of dry legal procedure. But it all came down to one thing, truth. And truth was on my side. The court ruled in favor of the original will. The judge declared the second version invalid due to clear evidence of undue influence and compromised mental capacity. Chase's inheritance was voided. My grandmother's estate was returned to me, every piece of it. The house, the savings. The items they'd already taken were ordered to be returned or reimbursed. The judge also denied my parents' countersuit entirely, called it meritless and retaliatory. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I just sat there, feeling the weight of every year I'd been ignored and dismissed finally lift. They tried to erase me, but I came back louder, and I wrote myself back into the legacy they tried to steal. They started showing up at my door 3 days after the ruling. At first it was my mom, standing on the front porch in her Sunday church dress like she was playing the part of a grieving widow. She knocked for 10 minutes straight, sobbing just loud enough for the neighbors to hear, asking me to let her explain, to talk it through like a mother and daughter should. I stood behind the curtain, arms crossed, watching her through the glass. I didn't move. I didn't open the door. The next day, it was both of them, my mom and dad, this time holding hands like some twisted united front. My dad wasn't crying. He was pacing, shouting at the house, telling me that this family couldn't take much more, that I had no idea the damage I'd caused. Then, as if someone flipped a switch, he started begging. Full-on collapse. Voice cracking, hands raised like he was surrendering to a ghost. He said they were old and scared and just wanted their daughter back. That it wasn't about the money anymore. It had never just been about the money. Not for me. On the third day, Chase came. I didn't recognize him at first. He looked like someone had taken the shine off him. Hair messy, shirt wrinkled, eyes dark and hollow. He stood there for a long time without knocking, just staring. When he finally spoke, it wasn't a threat this time. He said he was sorry, that it had all spiraled, that he didn't expect to lose everything, that he didn't expect to lose me. He said I was the only family he had left. I opened the door then, not wide, just enough to look him in the eye. And I told him the truth, that I was never the one who walked away from the family. They were the ones who left me behind. Again and again. Birthday after birthday. Lie after lie. They drew that line in the sand years ago. I just finally had the strength to step over it. I told him not to come back. Any of them. That this wasn't punishment, it was peace. And I intended to keep it. Then I shut the door. Behind me, the house was quiet. Still. Mine. Just as June wanted.